I am so scared that if he walks free, his first actions will be swift retribution toward me and others who spoke up about his abuse at trial. Those were the haunting words of victim Jane, who offered her own victim impact statement. It was not just some abstract fear. Jane had already testified at trial under a pseudonym because she was terrified of Sean Diddy Combs's reach and his resources. Her victim impact statement put the judge and the public both on notice. She believed release would equal retaliation, and this is something Judge Arun Subramanian had to weigh very seriously. And it goes to the heart of why prosecutors pushed for over a decade for Sean Combs inside a prison. They didn't quite get it, saying that he wasn't just dangerous in the past, but he is still a big threat even now.
Welcome to the global phenomenon, Surviving the Survivor. Here's your host, Emmy Award-winning journalist, Joel Waldman.
What's up, STS Nation? Welcome to Surviving the Survivor. This is the show that brings you the very best guests in all of true crime, as well as trial coverage. And we were at Sean Diddy Combs' trial for the opening statements and for the first week of the case. And man, what a trial it was, as it stretched on for weeks. No different today. Sentencing stretched on all day long in downtown Manhattan at the federal courthouse, with arguments from both sides and emotional victim impact statements and a combative back and forth over what is fair. And at the end, Judge Arun Subramanian, who is a very strong presence inside the courtroom, basically split the difference between time served and the 11 years that the government was asking for, as he handed down a 50-month prison sentence, covering what happened inside the courtroom during sentencing, the victims' voices, Diddy's numerous apologies, the prosecution's push, as I said, for 11 years, the defense's counter to say, hey, it should just be time served, and how the judge explained his decision. Let's break it all down. So, the sentencing. After nearly 8 hours of arguments inside that federal courthouse in Lower Manhattan on a Friday in October, Judge Subramanian heard these arguments and statements and said, you know what? I am splitting the difference, essentially going pretty much in the middle, handing down Sean Diddy Combs a 50-month sentence in prison and a $500,000, otherwise known as a $500,000 fine, and 5 years of supervised release. He made it clear, well, that Sean Combs had a history of philanthropy. None of that outweighed the harm that he did to these victims. And he said, and I quote here, a history of good works can't wash away the record in this case. You abuse these women. Keep in mind, again, this is in a federal courthouse, no audio, no video. These are the reports from actual reporters who witnessed the sentencing firsthand. This line from Judge Subramanian about your history of good works and philanthropy can't outweigh the abuse was aimed squarely at the defense's mitigation package. They gave the judge videos of Sean Combs with his kids, letters from his mother, reminders of his charity work. The judge did acknowledge all of that, but said that they're irrelevant when stacked against bruises, broken doors, and years of abuse. And the judge told the victims today, and again, I quote, "We heard you. These horrible acts were made public." Judges don't typically speak to victims, but it was different today. He wanted them to know, Judge Arun Subramanian did, that their testimony and their statements mattered in his own decision-making. He referenced again these photos that were shown in court. gashes, bruises, broken doors. Of course, we heard that devastating testimony from Cassie, excuse me, and the infamous 2016 video of Sean Combs assaulting Cassie Ventura in that hotel hallway at the Hotel Intercontinental in Los Angeles. Sean Combs had words of his own. He said, "I've been humbled and broken to my core." Direct quote. "I've been humbled and broken to my core." Now, this guy's an entertainer, has been his entire life. Is he entertaining the judge and the victims here by just sort of letting them hear what they wanted to at this sentencing, or do you think he was being sincere? Let me know. Drop your thoughts in the comments section. I'm always curious. He went on to say, "I hate myself right now." Called it disgusting, shameful, and sick behavior. You know what? I got to agree with it after hearing all of it. His apology in court today was by far and away his most public statement and acknowledgement of all this yet. He addressed both Cassie and Jane by name, trying to frame himself or cast himself as remorseful. But prosecutors argued inside the courtroom it was a little bit too little, too late, and that it was all strategic and not sincere. You'll recall after the Cassie Ventura video first broke, Diddy put out kind of a half-ass, half-hearted video, partly blaming himself, partly blaming addiction issues and other things. Didn't carry much weight. This time around, he wanted to make sure that the judge heard what he was saying and tried to penetrate the judge's belief system so that the judge would have some bit of leniency. And I guess it worked because, again, he really did split the difference between what the government was asking and what the defense was asking for, which, again, was basically time served on the defense part. Jane coming out and saying, "I am so scared that if he walks free, that he's going to come back and essentially attack me." Her fear underscored this risk that the judge essentially had to weigh and take today as part of the sentencing, and would some sort of early release give Sean Diddy Combs that, I don't know, the spark or the catalyst to act up again. This is something that the judge took really seriously. Cassie Ventura in a letter wrote, and I quote, "While the jury did not seem to understand or believe that I engaged in freak-offs because of the force and coercion the defendant used against me, I know that is the truth." So she obviously speaking out, disappointed with what the jury decided on, and sort of trying to correct the record, for lack of a better term, during the sentencing period. She pointed to the split verdict, Cassie did. Jurors acquitted Combs on trafficking and racketeering, but Cassie, doubled down, telling the court that her coerced participation in those now infamous freak-offs were very, very real. This was her way of kind of reclaiming the truth, even when the legal system, of course, didn't fully validate it for her. Now, Mia, the former assistant, who also went by a pseudonym, Mia, said, and I quote here, "Victims of sexual, psychological, and violent crimes are often forced to prove themselves while reliving the very trauma that destroyed them." Again, victims of sexual, psychological, and violent crimes are often forced to prove themselves while reliving the very trauma that destroyed them. The defendant, Sean Diddy Combs, has shattered many lives, and they too deserve justice. Now, Mia originally planned to speak in person, but backed down after receiving what prosecutors called a quote-unquote bullying letter from Combs's legal team. That's interesting. Even so, her written words were devastating, framing the entire trial as another form of trauma for victims, not just here, but everywhere. Sean Combs and his defense, though, were sort of relentless in trying to get that time served, which ultimately failed. And Sean Combs, as part of this, wrote a letter to Judge Arun Subramanian. This was before sentencing. And he writes in this letter, and I quote, "The old me died in jail, and a new version of me was reborn. Prison will change you or kill you. I choose to live." He's had time to think about it, but you have to ask yourself, is this all sincere, or is this all playing to the cameras and essentially playing to the judge? There are no cameras. You get what I'm saying. Playing to the court of public opinion. The lawyers packaged up this letter as evidence of some sort of transformation. He claimed that sobriety, religious rebirth, and focus on family over fame is what he arrived at since being held this entire time at the MDC Brooklyn, which is the Metropolitan Detention Center in Brooklyn. That is where Luigi Mangione is. That's where the Alexander brothers are. A horrific place by all accounts. And he says, again, that he's had this religious rebirth inside of there, that he has regained sobriety. Whether all of this is true or not, I guess remains to be seen. His own defense attorney, Xavier Donaldson, he said, and I quote, "The government equates Sean Combs with a pimp. Mr. Combs is not a pimp." That's debatable, I guess, under the circumstances of what we heard. Certainly a strong stance. In fact, the strongest stance that the defense had in this entire day of arguing during sentencing. Prosecutors argued that Sean Combs did act like a pimp by trafficking women across state lines. The defense rejected that label, painting him as a flawed man, not a predator for profit, not a predator for profit. I love the phrases that these attorneys come up with. The defense mitigation filings go on to say that their client, Sean Diddy Combs, that he himself has been traumatized, suffering addiction, PTSD, and depression since childhood. So they are doing the proverbial flipping of the script and saying, look, our defendant is also a victim, that he suffered as a child from all these things, including depression, and it's been a lifelong battle. Still, it does not excuse any man for the actions that he took against these women, particularly Cassie Ventura. And the defense here take an interesting tack. They lean in heavily to his own, Sean Diddy Combs' own father's murder when Sean Combs was just a child. Claiming that the trauma there really shaped him. Sean Diddy Combs, his father, infamously living a gangster life. Some argue that Sean Diddy Combs has been doing the same. They also submitted, the defense did, letters from his children and his mother, Janice Combs, describing him as a good father and son. They even admitted photos to the judge showing him doting on his kids with video, things of that nature. The prosecutors pushed hard for this 11-year sentence that they wanted. And they said in arguments here at sentencing, and I quote here, Sean Combs is a master puppeteer of his own image. They hammered home the contrast. On the one hand, the mogul who built this empire selling aspiration to people like Cassie Ventura, who he gave this multi-album deal to that never really came to fruition, while privately just brutalizing and abusing these women. They said of his public persona of bad boy and his image as a quote-unquote philanthropist was a quote-unquote calculated cover, that he used this position of power as this business owner and philanthropist to cover up the real demon that he is. And prosecutors also talked about his arrogance, saying, and I quote here, "It is the height of hubris to schedule public appearances before sentencing." Now, this referred to speaking engagements that Sean Diddy Combs, believe it or not, had already booked in Miami, where I'm sitting, beginning next week. And he did this before sentencing, thinking he was going to get out and be here in Miami speaking publicly about what he just went through. Prosecutors said that showed he assumed that he would walk out of the detention center free today, minimizing the seriousness of his crimes. The defense countered that these were teaching engagements, that what he was going to do in Miami were teaching engagements for youth, not celebratory events. But any which way you slice it, and his defense should be admonished for this, for even letting it come up. The optics of all this were horrible. In my opinion, a big mistake by the defense for even letting this be a thought in the process, that he was going to be speaking as soon as next week in Miami. First, he's going to be serving that 50-month sentence. So ultimately, Judge Arun Subramanian had a bit of a tough task here. He had to figure out, what do I do? Do I give this guy time served like the defense is asking, or do I go with the government and give him an 11-year sentence? Judge Subramanian says, you stood up to power. He said that directed to the victims, recognizing their courage, testifying against that they testified against one of the most powerful men in music. He also assured the victims, and I quote here, saying about Sean Diddy's impending 50-month sentence, this will be hard time. There is a light at the end of the tunnel. So on the one hand, hard time. On the other hand, that Sean Diddy Combs will ultimately, again, see the light of day. If he was sentenced or convicted, I should say, on all the counts that he faced, he likely never would have seen the light of day. Now he will likely see it much sooner than later. When he talked about this hard time, he was actually speaking to Sean Combs, acknowledging the punishment ahead, but dangling hope for rehabilitation. The judge did allow prosecutors to reference, and I quote here, acquitted conduct, behavior underlying charges he was acquitted of in sentencing. That's a bit controversial. The defense argued that this was unfair, but the judge said all the evidence of harm could be considered. So the verdict, if you all remember, came back July 2nd, this past summer, 2025. The jury found Sean Diddy Combs guilty of 2 Mann Act counts. That's MANN, which is transporting women for prostitution. He was acquitted of the most serious charges, which is the racketeering and sex trafficking. Those acquittals really stung prosecutors, but Cassie's letter today made it clear she still believed the coercion was proven. The convictions alone carried enough weight for prison time, and the Mann Act charges hark back to a law used for decades to prosecute exploitation across state lines, and that is what ultimately is sending Sean Diddy Combs to a federal prison where he's going to serve out these 50 months. Appeals are almost certainly to happen, as they do in every case. His attorneys already signaled they're going to challenge the use of this quote-unquote acquitted conduct, which was used today. Dozens of civil lawsuits are still pending. If you know the attorney out in Houston, Tony Busby, he's been kind of running that end of it in terms of representing victims, and 2 more victim suits were filed on the eve of this sentencing, so that continues. In terms of fallout for Sean Diddy Combs, his brand and business empire are essentially wrecked, some people say, in terms of deals, sponsorships, and ventures that have all collapsed in the wake of this. For survivors, the case shows that even celebrities can be held accountable, but it also shows the limits, that some charges just didn't stick. Victims were even harassed into silence. There were people when I was there inside the gallery, inside the courthouse, watching this, who screamed out at different points that Sean Diddy Combs was innocent, that they believed he was innocent. So justice here came piecemeal. So a mixed bag. But again, Judge Arun Subramanian sentencing Sean Diddy Combs, the hip hop mogul, to 50 months in a federal prison. He's going to begin serving, as Judge Arun Subramanian said, that hard time. Tonight, you've got to be thinking of these victims. Cassie Ventura, of course, front and foremost in all of this. She was the first victim to testify. And then you've got Mia and Jane and others, including former escorts that, all had the courage to speak up in a case that had, as we now know, a mixed verdict, and even some could say now a mixed sentencing. Sean Diddy Combs not getting the harshest sentence, which is what the government wanted at 11 years, also not getting the most lenient sentence, which is time served, which is what the defense is asking for. But expect there to be more news, more appeals. One thing you definitely are not going to see is Sean Diddy Combs here in Miami next week. He's going to be in a federal prison. He's going to be there for the next 50 months. And we'll see if he gets out early or not. So stay tuned. But as always, justice for the victims. Love you, America. And justice for these victims of Sean Diddy Combs. No matter the verdict, they are still victims, and he will still be heading to federal prison. See ya on the flip side.